You're listening to the Happier Marriage Podcast, which is a podcast for hopeful spouses, and this is episode 15. This episode is entitled, Are You Experiencing or Causing Pain in Your Marriage, and What You Need to Know About It? This is part 2 of a 5-part course on happier marriage secrets. This episode will only be an excerpt of day number 2 on the recording. If at any point you would like to access the full course, you can do so by going to kingsleygrant.com/HMS course. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS course. Now, in this episode, you'll discover why you and your spouse are saying and doing things that are causing much pain in your marriage and what to do about them. Because this was done with an audience, you'll hear references to that during the presentation. So you hear me engaging the audience. This is because it's a live recording that you're listening to. So your imagination will be required at certain points because you're not seeing the slides, but no worries. It is clearly explained for you in this episode. Here's what I would also like you to do at the end. Make sure you listen to the past episodes, especially part 1 of this series, because you will have a better understanding of what this episode is all about. So listen to the past episode, part number 1. That's episode number 14. Subscribe to the show, leave a rating and a review, and bookmark this podcast as your top resource for insights on having a happier marriage. And stay tuned as we unpack this episode. Hi, I'm Kingsley Grant, a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified relationship coach, and an in-demand speaker who have been married for over 3 decades with 2 adult children. I'm also the founder and CEO of Helping Families Improve, a counseling center that caters to helping families experience the life God intended for them to have. So how do we have a happier marriage where love, respect, and deep connection takes place? That's what you'll find out as you listen to the Happier Marriage Podcast. What's up, ladies and gentlemen of Happier Marriage World? I hope you're ready for another round of the Happier Marriage Podcast for hopeful spouses. This episode might trigger you because it is going to require you to do some soul searching. But that is one of the purpose of this show, to stir things up and then to take you in for a safe landing. So buckle up and here we go. A quick recap of day number 1 is we talked about you picking a number and establishing where you are on this scale of moving towards a happier marriage. And we gave an example. If you chose 6, we said, okay, all we are concerned about in this next 5 days is to move from the number you picked. So I hope you remember the number. I'll have it written down somewhere. And we want to get you 1 digit forward towards your happiest marriage dream or goal that you have. We talked about that in day number 1. And we said whatever number you picked, right? In this case, as an example, 6, whatever number you put that there. We're simply saying you are saying that your marriage could be happier where that number is right now. And to get to a happier place, we're simply saying the next number up is what would get you to a happier place. And that's why we put this on the scale. I also introduced to you the roadmap that we're following in this next 5 days. And in day number 1, we unlocked the secret, which I mentioned earlier, is empathic communication. We talked about that and why that is the singular most effective way for you to have a happier marriage. So we unlocked that, and it was empathic communication. What I did not give you, which I want to share with you in this day number 2, is a definition, a working definition of empathic communication. What it is. And so I put together this definition. You may want to write this down or take a snapshot of this, a picture of this. And it's the ability to communicate your understanding, right? It's the ability to communicate your understanding of another while doing your best to share their feelings, right? So while you're communicating your understanding of what it is you're experiencing in your relationship, right? And with feedback and so on, you're also sharing their feelings. So you're looking for two things: the content, which is what's being said, but you're also looking for the tone that of what's being said. What is the emotion behind that? And so when you are operating from an empathic communication position, you're doing those two things. You're able to understand what's being said, but also the feelings behind that. Now, wouldn't that be nice if you had a spouse who would be able to do those two things? Wouldn't that be what you're looking for in a marriage, in a relationship, where your spouse is able to, while you're sharing with them, while you're communicating with them, they're trying to understand you at the same time? Because as I said in day number one, what I hear a lot in the work I've done with hundreds of couples is they want to be understood. So I want her to understand me, and he's not understanding where I'm coming from, and he's or she is not making the effort to understand where I'm coming from, and don't even give me the chance to even do that, right? So everyone want to be understood, right? You want to be understood. I want to be understood. Every single person fight to be understood. And we are trying to get our spouse, our partner, our husband, our wife to understand us. And when it doesn't happen, is where we enter the area of conflict. Now, we also talked about that there's a gap between where you are at A, could be happier, and we listed what are those two different positions, those two different spaces or goals that we want to get. And we said empathic communication is what's going to actually get us to cover that gap that we mentioned in day number one. And here is also the benefits we talked about in day number one. I want to just quickly go over those with you. That it's empathic communication. Empathic communication creates open and honest conversations, increases trust, build emotional closeness and intimacy. It decreases misunderstandings and creates better sexual experience. We talked about that as the benefits of empathic communication. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that empathic communication, as I said, has the word empathy. It's from the word empathy. But here is what happened. If I was to ask you, are you a person of empathy? Are you empathetic in your dealings, or you try to be empathetic in your dealings with people? I would probably guess you would say yes. Most people think of themselves as empathetic. That means they're trying to put themselves in the other person's shoes. But here's the problem. When someone say they're empathetic, I think they really don't fully understand what it is you're saying, because there are three layers or three different ideas of what empathy is. Empathic communication falls on the definition or the aspect of empathy that truly matters. So let me give you those three, because I think it's important. This is very, very important for us to understand what empathy is, to see if we are empathizing. Because if we're going to communicate with our spouse empathically, we've got to be able to understand, how does that look? If I'm doing it, what should be happening? So I want to give you these three different layers of empathy. The first one is what's called cognitive empathy. Now, don't get hung up on these phrases, because yes, it's the part of the scientific piece of it. But what happened is, cognitively, every one of us can operate in a cognitive manner, right? In cognitive empathy, which means I understand how you think. I understand how you see the world, and I can share your perspective. That is where we are saying, is just using your mind to try to conceive what's happening. And that's cognitive empathy. And some people operate here and they are struggling. Cognitive empathy, right? Which means I understand how you think. I see the world and I can share your perspective. That is what some people operate in, and most of us can do that. Okay. The second layer, the second part of empathy that some people do get is emotional empathy. So it's when you feel the feelings of another inside yourself. Most times, cognitive empathy are people who are operating cognitively, are people who basically truly haven't had an experience, right? They really haven't had the experience of what it is you're sharing, right? But emotional empathy is when you feel the feelings, you can identify, you can say, man, you know what? I've been there. I know what that feels like. I have had similar situations. That's when your emotions get triggered and you understand instantly how that person feels. That is emotional empathy. So when someone says, man, I feel you on that, right? They're actually speaking about the empathy that is emotional. They've gone beyond just cognitive. Now they're actually moving into the area of emotional. And then why I'm going through this and taking the time, because when we get into the interactions, you're going to see where if you're going to operate from an empathic communication, this is what you need to understand. Okay. The third part of empathy which is truly empathic. This is the part we need to understand, we need to get to. This is the part most people do not operate from. And that is, not only do I know how you think and feel, I actually care about you, right? So because of that, I'm going to have your back and give you feedback to help you and us. That is what empathic concern, that's the third level or the most important level of empathy. This is what you would call compassion, right? It's like compassion. So when you're going to operate from an empathic communication aspect, you've got to realize, what is it you're feeling? Are you using your brain and your mind to say, okay, I could see what you're coming from. I could see where you came to that conclusion. I can understand where you got that. I think someone said yesterday and shared a very important aspect of communication. And they said, suppose someone, is trying to tell you something about, I was mentioning about how a person held back their health issue from their spouse because they didn't want them to be concerned. And the person said, aren't they really lying? Right? Because what happened is they were saying, I'm trying to think about how you may think or feel about what it is I'm going through, and I'm trying to protect you. Now, again, it doesn't make it right. However, it just is understandable. And the person says, I could, in yesterday's comment says, I could see and I can understand why they would say or do what they did. They were simply saying, I'm cognitively thinking about it, right? But I could also see where that could cause the spouse to feel left out of that journey. And someone says, but I think it was very important, says, yesterday in our presentation, together, you want to do this together. You don't want to leave the other person out. And that's why you should share with that person. We'll get into that shortly. So empathic concern is not only do I know how you think and feel, I actually care about you. So I'm going to have your back and give you feedback. Now, here's what every person that enter any relationship, they enter with these 3 hopes and 3 fears. And as I go through this, I want you to look at your own relationship and see if this was true of you when you first started, right? Because every relationship tend to have these 3 hopes and 3 fears as they entered. And what happened is these 3 hopes I'll share with you and 3 fears, when something goes off, is when they begin to snowball to that area we talk about the behavior, the interaction become very negative. And here are the 3 hopes and 3 fears. So the 3 hopes are this: when you enter a relationship, you find someone, right? You find that husband material or that wife material, and you're simply saying, going in, everything that I ever wanted, I will find with you. That is your hope. You're hoping that this person, this man, this woman is everything you ever wanted, right? Now, we're not saying that you're going to say he or she is perfect. No, but you're simply saying, as I've summed up the relationship, he is everything I ever wanted. She is everything I ever wanted. And I'll find what I want in him or in her. That is what one of those hopes you had when you entered your marriage, right? If you can go all the way back and remember, that is one of the lenses through which you were looking. The second hope you had was everything good I have had, I will keep, because this person is such that he or she will allow me to be myself. The things that I have brought that made me where I am, that's good in my life, I will keep, right? So whatever is good in my life, he or she will allow me to not give me permission. Of course, it's not taking permission. You're simply saying that person will allow you and create space for you to keep. That was your hope going into that marriage. And number three is everything bad that had ever happened to me will not happen with you. That is a hope. And that's why you entered the relationship arms wide open, holding nothing back, because you are trusting that this person is going to satisfy those three hopes for you. But here is what happens. Right behind those three hopes are these three fears. So right there behind it, the three fears is the good things I hope for are not happening. And so your brain begin to scan and say, wait a minute. What I was hoping for is not happening. Good things I had, I am losing. I'm not being able to be myself anymore. I am losing myself. Upsetting, hurtful things that happened before are happening again with you. And now you begin to see where your anxiety begins to rise. You begin to depress over what's happening because these three hopes giving way are giving place to three fears. These three fears are now working out in your relationship. Now, guess what? This is prime territory or prime ground to germinate these negative, disruptive interactions, because you're going to try to get back the three hopes, or, and so you're going to try to push for that. And so from there, it's spiraled into this area here called where we talked about the identifying disruptive interactions, because those three hopes are not there. The three fears are now taking its place. And now this whole thing, this cycle begins. You're pushing to get back what you had initially. And that person is either resisting, or this is where you would say, now I'm getting to see his or her true colors, right? Have you ever heard that before? Or have you experienced that where you said, now you're showing your true colors? You may not say to him or her, but you're thinking, he is now showing his true colors. Or maybe you're saying it to a therapist, or you're saying it to to a friend. Man, he is now showing his true colors, or she is now showing her true colors. This is where it's happening in stage number 2. Why? Because those hopes and fears those hopes are dashed and fears have not taken its place. Now, when you are in the disruptive interactions phase of the relationship, what tends to happen, everything tend to be pushing each person away from each other, right? So you find that very little by little, you're having less and less conversations. You're choosing to sit in different areas in the house, if at all in the house. You're choosing to avoid each other. And when you do get into conversations, the behaviors, the words, the conversation are so toxic that it's pushing you further and further away. And this gap, this distancing is occurring. So in this process of disruptive interactions, I mentioned it in day number 1, that what tends to happen is each spouse, at least one, maybe both, are looking out the window. What? Now, they're not necessarily looking out the window for another relationship. They could be, but what they're doing here at this point is looking out and seeing you, right? What you are doing that's causing the problems in the relationship. This is the finger pointing. This is the blaming that begins to happen. Now, if you agree or have experienced that or seen that, or would you say this makes sense so far? Does this make sense so far? Let me ask you, does this make sense so far? Can you see where this disruptive interaction is where most times one person is looking out and pointing a finger and putting the blame at someone else's feet? If that's true, or if you've experienced it or that makes sense to you, just put in the chat as you're watching. Just now put in the chat, makes sense, right? Just that, but makes sense. Let me know if that makes it. Okay, thank you. Tamika says that makes sense. Thank you for that. I appreciate that because yeah, it's where thank you, Carla. It makes sense. Yes, it does. Because this is the gradual. See, most times we're in it so much, we don't see how it's happening. We don't trace to see how did we get there. And someone watching in Facebook says that makes sense. Thank you. Right? We don't necessarily see how we got there, but all of a sudden we end up there. Thank you, Melissa. It makes sense because we think we just wake up overnight. We wake up one day and we are having this disruptive interactions. No, it took time. It's a gradual process, my friend. And when it happens, we're now looking out the window and we're saying, look at what he's or she's doing or she's doing. All right. Now, here's the list of things that tend to be happening in disruptive interactions. I'm going to take a few moments to go through this. And if you could add anything else to this list, you can post it also in the chat. But it was also mentioned yesterday in our day number 1, that is disrespect, right? Disrespect tend to happen here. There is disrespectful conversation, disrespecting even the house, I won't say rules, but guidance, what the things you have set up in the house, right? There's disrespect about how you interact with each other, how you speak to each other, the words that are being used. You can sense this disrespect, right? And it happens on both sides, that there are things that are disrespectful, right? Not just the words, but the behavior, the attitudes, the way that the person comes and go, right? No, nothing is said. No one's share anything. It's almost like, okay, I'm doing me, you do you. It's a whole disrespect feeling that it has enveloped the house. Name calling. This is something that I really cringe at sometimes when I hear couples would tell me what their spouse said to them, the name that they call them, such as idiot, stupid, witch with a B, right? You name it. My friend, listen, can I just say this right now? If you're experiencing name calling of those kind that is derogatory, and I have the derogatory word, demeaning, condescending, putting you down, fool, like you're a fool, right? Let me just say right now, that is verbal abuse. That is verbal abuse. And you should not tolerate that. You should not tolerate that. You know, you are a person that of dignity that God created. And no one should belittle or make less of you because number one, you're created in God's image. And you should not tolerate that. And don't see it as cute and don't get back in you doing also. If he calls me a name, I'm going to call him name. If she calls me a name, I'm going to call. No. Who is a mature one in the relationship? Who's going to be the Christ-like one if you're a Christian? Who's going to be the one that says, wait a minute, I'm not going to lower my standard. I'm not going to bring myself down to the level of him or her. So when there's name calling, specific name calling that is derogatory, right? You should not tolerate. You should remove yourself, if you physically can, from that situation, or you check out emotionally and you do not add fuel to the fire, because that is should be off the, that should be a no, um, no trespassing sign should be there. No name calling thing should be a part of the household. I encourage couples sometimes just to put up rules. For example, no yelling, no cursing, no name calling. Those are things we're going to abide by. No matter how hot we get, we will not cross the line. Right? We will not cross the line. That is crossing the line. And when it's happening, it's verbal abuse. Let no one tell you anything else. When someone's calling you those names and it's happening because of disruptive interactions, those interactions disrupt the relationship. It's pushing you away. It's diminishing the relationships. Sometimes also parents will align themselves with the kids and try to get the kids on their side, right? And to make dad out or mom out to be a bad person. Or they will try to align themselves and do things with the kids away from the father, dad or mom, right? What happened is you're leveraging the kids and weaponizing the kids against your spouse. When you're weaponizing your kids against your spouse, that is disruptive interactions. That should not be, the kids should not be a part of the equation. You as adults are having an issue. You should not use the kids and weaponize them against the other parent. Okay. Now, someone said, thank you, Tamika, said no slamming doors or sleeping on the couch. Yeah, sometimes that is where it's also could be a sign of disrespect. I'm talking to you, you turn your back, you slam the door in my face and walk out. That's disrespect, right? And then there's a whole different, because spend some time talking about what disrespect looks like, because every household has to determine what's disrespect for them. Because what might be disrespectful for my household may not be disrespectful for some other people's household. For example, I work with a couple, and in their house, it's okay to use swear words and curse at each other and think nothing of it. I don't know about you, but that's not going to happen in my house. That's not going to happen in my house. But anyway, that's how they're okay with that. They see nothing wrong with that. And it's any wonder today, the kids who are now young adults are treating them like, disrespectful. They're complaining now about it. What I wonder why they feel as if they can behave that way, right? Another thing of disruptive interaction, it's sarcasm. It's being sarcastic. Sarcasm is really insecurity. It's a way of putting someone down. It's a way of belittling that person. And so sometimes we respond sarcastically because we want to feel superior above that person. We want to use a biting remark to hurt them. And so sarcasm is a disruptive interaction, right? So we have to identify these things. And also sometimes it's withholding sex as a form of punishment. And that creates disruptive interaction because, yes, I understand sometimes because of emotional intertwining. I understand from a female's position, she just being disrespected and treated by her husband a certain way, and he want her to roll over. It doesn't happen that way, right? So I understand that may be an outcome, but just to withhold sex to get back at and to punish that other person, that is an issue where it creates other issues of being disruptive, right? Now, also blaming and shaming. This is where you're looking out the window and you're blaming that person for what happened. If I could ever bring you back, if you're a person who have read the Bible and you know the story very well, in the Garden of Eden, when God came to Adam and Eve and the serpent about what happened, they ate the forbidden fruit. What was the first thing that Adam did? He blamed Eve. What did Eve do? She blamed the serpent. Blaming has been around from the very beginning of time. And we still do that today. We blame someone else for something that they're doing. We're looking out the window and we're only seeing what the person is doing, right? And we're pointing the finger and saying, if I'm only behaving this way, because you behave that way. So if you hadn't behaved that way, I would not behave this way. Really? Really? So what I'm hearing you're saying is that You're this puppet that someone is just like, okay, jump, you jump. Someone is just gonna, okay, sit, you sit. You're not an animal. You're a person of free will. And if you are saying the reason why you're behaving this way because your spouse is behaving the way he or she is behaving, then you want to take a really long, hard look at yourself in the mirror and ask this question. When have you become so small? When have you become so, it's almost a miniature person where you are now you are at the discretion of your spouse who says jump, you jump. No, right? You are responsible for your behavior. And I get there in a few moments when I talk about looking in the mirror. So abuse, I mentioned abuse earlier. Verbal, physical abuse is disruptive interaction. No one should ever put their house. No one should ever put their hand on another. The moment that happens, my friend, here's what abuse does. Wherever you leave off is where you pick up the next time. You do not go back. So if you are called names, it's only going to lead to the next level. Every domestic violence, physical violence, began with verbal abuse. Every domestic violence began with verbal abuse. So these disruptive interactions that are taking place, you've got to nip it in the bud. You've got to make sure it's not tolerated because it's only going to grow and become worse, right? Also, controlling behaviors. Sometimes what happens is a person is trying to control outcomes. And the reason why they're trying to control, because they feel insecure. They feel that if they don't control, then they don't have anything to hold on to, right? They don't have anything to hold on to. But controlling behaviors, my friend, is also a sign of insecurity. And it also will push the other person farther away because he or she feels as if they're being micromanaged or they're being parented by you. So they feel like they will say to you, I'm not your child. Have you ever heard that? You're not my mother. You're not my father, because of how they're being spoken to, right? Cursing and swearing. I mentioned that earlier. To swear at someone and use a derogatory word to describe them, use body parts to describe your spouse. That is, again, disrespectful, but it's a very derogatory way of speaking to, number one, someone created in the image of God, but number two, that is your husband. That is your wife. That is flesh of your flesh, bone of your bone. And you're speaking to her that way? You're calling her those names? You're calling him those names? You're speaking to him that way? Bone of your bone, flesh of your flesh? Do you see where there's disruptive interactions? I'm going to share with you in a few moments now what are the results of this, right? You may already begin to go ahead of me and think about, wow, this could be very, could cause some great damages. Yes, it can and has. Gaslighting, right? When someone's trying to make you feel like you're crazy, right? The evidence is there and they're trying to make you say, you didn't see what you saw, you didn't hear what you heard, right? And they will try to convince you and manipulate you, and they gaslight you. And you begin to start thinking, wait a minute, am I crazy or what? And you start believing, because people who gaslight typically are abusers or have an abusive tendency. Let's put it that way. They're not always, but they have an abusive tendency, or they are controllers. So they gaslight to try to deflect and try to make you feel like you're crazy. Raising voices. When I hear someone would say, oh yeah, he's yelling, so I have to yell as well. Can I say this? May I say to couples all the time, if you are trying to communicate to your spouse and normally you don't raise your voice and you think you have to raise your voice for him or her to hear you, you've lost it. Actually, you've crossed the line. Because what you're simply saying is, he ain't going to hear unless I raise my voice. Really? So you're training the relationship that the only way for someone to hear is to raise your voice, to yell. And here's what happens sometimes when a spouse will say, "Stop yelling." You say, "I'm not yelling." Let me show you what yelling is, right? But listen, I find that you are not the most reliable person to know when you're yelling if you are a yeller. For example, I know I speak fast, and maybe at some point in this presentation, you may have heard me speed up, and you say, "Kings, slow down." So if someone said to me, "Slow down," I am not the most reliable person, right? To trust myself that I know what slowing down, fast speaking is, because I'm so used to that. I'm so used to that I will not know what it's like until someone says to me, and I have to trust the person and say, "Okay, you know what? You are that outside person. You are my mirror, and you're saying something that I don't see in myself. Thank you." So if you're yelling and someone says to you, "You're yelling," trust that you are yelling, but you're so used to it, you don't even know it yourself. You cannot be trusted. You cannot, excuse me, you cannot trust yourself. And you're not the most reliable person to know what yelling is. And someone mentioned here, so true, Tamika, a soft answer turns away wrath, right? And so if I want to even go beyond that, add to that, Tamika, is where one of my favorite Bible verses is James. James says, be angry and sin not. For the the anger, right? Anger produces wrath, and also the fact that my anger is me trying to get a righteous outcome. And so if I yell, and I don't normally yell when I'm speaking, then I've crossed the line. I've gone above. So I'm angry. I'm now sinning, right? Um, Someone says, "What about Caribbean people?" I'm not sure what it means, but I'll just take a stab at that. It's like where someone say, "We're Hispanic and we're loud. We're always loud." Well, if you're married, if you're in a Hispanic community and you are with your people, and say that's fine. But if you're with a husband or a wife who is not Hispanic and that is not their upbringing, you need to modify that yelling, because now you're no longer in that setting, and you're going to respect the fact that your husband or your wife is simply saying to them, that's yelling. And why wouldn't you want to modify that for your husband's sake or for your wife's sake? Or if you're Caribbean, right? If you're Caribbean and you say that we're naturally, he says Caribbeans are naturally loud. Well, they could be, right? They could be for a reason. But again, if they're in a context, a loving, thriving, healthy context called marriage, and their spouse is saying to them, "You're yelling," they need to trust that, right? And the Bible says it this way: as much as it's possible, live at peace with all men. Do what you have to do. Paul says, "I become all things to all men so I may win some." He modified his behavior in certain settings. We have that ability. And that's why I share with you about empathic communication and about empathy, where it says it's having the ability or showing the ability, right, to feel and to understand another person. So if we're going to empathically have this relationship, we've got to modify, right? We've got to modify and say, yeah, we are all yellers, but you know what? I could say, "Oh, we're all sinners, so therefore I should continue to sin if I'm a Christian," right? Because we're all sinners. No, God says no. He says modify your behavior. So why, if I can't continue or don't continue that, why should I continue to say I'm a yeller? We're all loud, right? It doesn't really fit, doesn't really jive. So these are some things that I find, and you may also want to add, if you can, in the chat, if anything else comes to mind, maybe not in your relationship, but you've seen it or read about it or heard about it. So other things that would say lead to disruptive interactions. What else comes to your mind that you would say leads to, maybe not here, or maybe I didn't cover? And I want to kind of quickly now move to the consequences of this in a few moments. But is there anything you would add? And you can add it while I'm speaking anyway. I'll see it, and I would appreciate that. Now, What we want to say is, oh, this is a very good one here. This person said silent treatment. Yeah, that is one where people will use a silent treatment and not want to talk. And basically, we call it silent treatment, but it's so loud sometimes to the person. The silence is just really sometimes is aggressive, or passive aggressiveness could be at play, right? So silent treatment is not necessarily a healthy thing. One of the things that can be agreed upon is what to do if you find yourself in any heated moment. And silent treatment would not be the thing. It really could work against you. So, and again, I could really go off in that and talk more about that, because there's a way to communicate through empathically about how to handle conflict and heated moments where the relationship wins. Because what happened is that some people, thank you, Tamika, for sharing. So someone said, what if you're joking with this name calling, just messing with each other? Well, I think if you understand, and that's fine, if you both see it as a joking, lighthearted moment, then that's okay. I mean, it's a agreed upon thing. And in your relationship, if you see it that way, like someone would say, "How you knucklehead?" I understand that's just a funny, kind of joking, lighthearted moment. And when it's lighthearted, right? When it's joking, but when it's really not a joke, a moment of joking. When that person is trying to hurt you by the words you're using, and that's not lighthearted at all, right? And you know the difference between that. Now, what we just speak about here, a lot of these things is where we can see it in our spouse, right? We can see this in our spouse. But here's a problem. We don't necessarily see it in ourselves, right? We don't see it in ourselves many times. We see our spouse doing all these things, but we don't see what we're doing. And here's what happened. If you're going to change, if we're going to get ourselves through this whole 5 stages, right? We've got to then begin to look at, what do I do if I find myself, or if we find ourselves in this state of disruptive interaction? Because most times somebody is trying to win something here. And here's what I find. You can be right as much as you want, but if you prove yourself right, that means somebody is wrong. And if that person feels wrong, then guess what? They see you as wrong. So now, who is right? Let's take that one more step further. If you're trying to win in what you're doing here, and if you feel like you've won and you've kind of, muscled your way through and cowered that person, you've won. You feel like, I've won this conversation. I've won this thing. Guess what? That means somebody else lost. And if somebody else lost, they're going to see you as a loser. Who really have won? So what I say is this. In these moments, it's really to look at, it's not who is right, it's what is right. It's not who wins, but does the relationship win? The relationship wins. That means you and your spouse have to give up some grounds. You cannot hold on to what you have always does and expect the relationship to win. The relationship will not win when one of you have won. Both of you must give up some grounds so that the relationship can get all that it needs. And here's how I put it. You will not get all that you want in any kind of interaction, but that's okay. The question is, does the relationship get all it needs? And that's what really matters, right? So when you're looking in the mirror, my question to you is this: as you go down this list, and you don't have to share this if you don't want to, but this is your own moment. Are you guilty of any of these behaviors? Whether you're saying, "Oh, I'm only reacting to what he does or what she does." Well, can I say something to you? If you are being reactive, then you are doing something very unhealthy. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean by that. Imagine you went to the doctor and the doctor gave you a prescription, and he or she said to you, "I'm going to check with you in a week from now to see how you're doing." The doctor calls a week later and says to you, "How is the medication?" If you said to the doctor, "I am reacting to the medication," is that good? Is it a good or bad thing? Right? So you would agree that it's a bad thing if you're reacting to the medication, right? Now, if you said, "Oh, doc, I'm so great. Thank you. I am responding well," right? I'm responding. That means it's good. So whenever you're reacting in a relationship context, it's never good. It's never healthy. You want to be responding instead. But to respond in a relationship requires certain skill set. And I will, again, I could go down into that rabbit hole and just flesh out how that will be look. But we just want to make sure we don't get derailed here. But just understand that you have to change the way you are engaging if you're going to move to a more responsive setting. So again, when you look in the mirror, what do you see as what you're guilty of, right? In this setting, my friend, here is what's happening here. I have put some band-aids to show this. There's great pain. Wounding is happening. You're saying things and doing things that you may be regretting, and you cannot pull back. This is where the pain of the relationship is taking place. This is where the fears that we mentioned earlier, the hopes are gone. Now the fears are in. But not just the fears, but this is deep wounds being taking place. Thank you for your honesty. I'm guilty of raising my voice when I get mad enough, and then the door will slam. Thank you for your honesty, Tamika. You know what? I appreciate you sharing that, because hopefully in the context of what you're sharing here, it realized that is not helping, it's disrupting, right? And so wounds are occurring. Pain is happening. Insecurities is building. These are the things that are happening when these disruptive behaviors or interactions are taking place, right? Because the brain is taking note of that and it's building a case against the other person. It's simply saying, this may not be a safe place to be. He's no longer safe. She is no longer safe. And so you begin to guard, sleep with one eye open, right? You're beginning to watch and you begin to pull away. And so this is where healing is going to be needed, right? Which is setting up for our day number 3. Here is what I want you to understand, my friend, as you're watching this. You are only responsible for your actions and your response to other people's actions. You are only responsible for your actions and your response to other people's actions. You cannot control what your husband or your wife say or do. Yes, you can say you're not going to tolerate it, and there are things you can do to communicate that very loud and clear. But you are responsible, meaning that if your action is a reaction to their action, right? If your action is a reaction to their action and you're trying to go toe to toe, then you have become complicit. You are also signing up and you're part of the problem, right? And we have to take responsibility, because unless we begin to identify our role and look in the mirror, we're never going to be able to move past this. So here's what we started off with. If we're going to close this gap, if we're going to move from where we are to the next level, we've got to look in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror, what have you seen? What do you see? Right? So here's a question as we kind of wind down here. What are you responsible for? What's your role? Right? So what's happening right now? What's happening right now in your relationship? I want you to write down in your notebook or on a paper somewhere. And this is where you're looking in the mirror. You're not looking out the window. This is where you are looking in the mirror, only in the mirror, right? The window is closed. It's not what you ought to look. You've looked enough out there. I want you to look in the mirror right now and be honest. What are you responsible for? What's your role? What are you doing? Someone says, yes, help me, Lord. You're right. We need the Lord's help. We truly need the Lord's help. Yeah. And I chuckle, but truly we do need the Lord's help. Um, yeah, help me, Lord. Yeah, you're right, Carla. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we need the Lord's help. So I want you to write down and take a moment right now to truly, soberly, and prayerfully consider this one idea. What are you responsible for? What's your role? So even if your husband or your wife is responsible for 90% of what's happening, you are responsible for 10%. There's never 100% responsibility on one person. Never, never, ever. Can't be. Right? Now, you may have to look very close. You may have to look through a microscopic glass, right, to find your responsibility. But when you look, you may find that it's really bigger than you actually realize. Maybe your spouse may have been trying to tell you what that is, but you're just not listening. And you know what? Maybe he or she may have disqualified themselves to be the one to tell you anyway. And I can understand why you may not want to listen to them. But let's face the mirror and say, am I doing things, saying things that is contributing to this place of where we're disruptive interactions are taking place? Am I disrupting as well? And I want you to write that down. Right? Write that down. And that's what I want you to do is with that. Maybe journal about that. Maybe pray if you're a person of prayer. Pray about it if you're a person of prayer. Right? Or journal about it. And if you just don't do anything else with it right now, because tomorrow, day number 3, we're going to go a bit. The next level is what we're going to do with this. So hang on to this. So write it down. You're going to bring this with you tomorrow because we're going to talk about what to do with this, how to actually take what you've written down that you're responsible for. That's all I want you to write down, right? You will not be responsible for the whole of everything that's happening, but you're responsible for part of it. Okay? So, homework task number 2. Choose one thing you see in the mirror that you are responsible for. And you don't have to write the most nuclear thing. Just maybe something that's light. Possibly maybe you say, I'm a yeller. And just, let's see, some people have been so honest to post it here, which I appreciate it, to say, you know what, here's what I'm responsible for. And that really, I just like, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that, because it just gives others a sense of like, we're all in this together. None of us are perfect. We all struggle. But choose one thing you see in the mirror that you are responsible for and post it in the group, right? So we can actually see that. And again, it's just really not to put anybody out there, not to throw anybody under the bus. It's simply say, you know what? I need to come to create an accountability. If I put that out there and somebody who knows me or even sees me, they could pray with me or pray for me. They could hold me accountable if I ask them, whatever it is, or just to have it out there is a form of accountability. Okay. So I want to encourage you to do that. Here's a question I want you again to go back to. What are you responsible for? What's your role? You are only responsible for your actions and your response, right? So it's responsibility. What's your response ability? The ability you put in to respond rather than reacting. And then that's your homework. Now, tomorrow is where we're going to take this to the next level. We're going to recognize healing needs. Maybe by now you're seeing, after all the wounding, of all the pain, of all the hurts that have taken place, the next only natural step level to go is, how do you heal? How do you heal from this? And how do your spouse heal? Let me go one step further. How does the relationship heal from this? Is it possible? Yes. I've seen so many people who have gone this same path, more in a more concise way, though, when I'm working with people, maybe one-on-one. Actually, when I did a retreat recently, and we had a couples break out in small groups to do some exercise I gave to create a healing moment. And I'll share more with you on day number 3 about recognizing the healing needs that you have, but also recognizing the healing needs that your spouse have. because it's not just you who needs to be healed. They also need healing as well. And there you have it, my friends. I hope this episode encouraged you and gave you some hope. This podcast is designed with that in mind, and each week we seek to find one more way to get you closer to your heart's desire when it comes to your marriage. Make sure you give the show a rating and a review by clicking the appropriate link that will take you there on the platform you're listening to. Also, subscribe to the show so you'll be updated on all new releases, especially as we go through this 5-part series. Remember, if you're interested in the full course, which consists of 5 videos, you can access it at kingslegrand.com/HMS course, and the link will be in the show notes as well. And I'm inviting you to join me on a live webinar on Thursday, October 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. But you must register for it, right? You must register for it. The link is kingslegrand.com/webinar. kingslegrand.com/webinar. And this link will also be in the show notes that follow this episode. Do it today. Don't delay. It will only take you less than 2 minutes for the review and rating, but also to do the registration. My friend, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, may God bless you and keep you and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face towards you and give you his peace both now and forever. Amen. God bless. See you on the next episode of the Happier Marriage Podcast.